They say family is everything, but sometimes family becomes your worst nightmare. I'm Patricia, born in 1952 in Melbourne. Back in 2019, at 67, my own son poured boiling water on my arm because I asked him to help with groceries. I felt my world crumble. But then something happened that changed everything. Today, at 72, sitting in my peaceful cottage garden, I'm finally sharing this because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. If you're listening, drop your location below, and please subscribe. This story might save a life. It started 3 years after my beloved husband Arthur passed away. Declan, my only child, moved into our family home in Port Blossom with his wife Bridget. "Mom, you can't manage this big house alone," he'd said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We'll take care of everything." What a fool I was to believe him. The house Arthur and I built together became my prison. Every morning, I'd wake to Bridget's sharp voice cutting through the walls. "Patricia, the dishes aren't done properly again. Are you losing your mind?" She'd inspect my cleaning like a drill sergeant, running her finger along surfaces, shaking her head in disgust. "No wonder Arthur died. Probably couldn't stand living with such a slob." Those words hit harder than any physical blow. Arthur had been my soulmate for 43 years. We'd saved every penny to buy that house and the little cottage by the lake. He'd planted roses in the front garden, saying they'd bloom long after we were gone. Now Bridget was letting them die, claiming they were too much work. Declan had changed completely. The sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions had become a stranger with cold eyes and clenched fists. "You're a burden, Mom," he'd say when I asked for help reaching something high. "We're doing you a favor letting you stay here." Stay here? In my own home. The abuse escalated slowly, like a frog in boiling water. First, they moved me to the smallest bedroom, claiming they needed space for Bridget's home office. Then they started controlling my meals. "You're eating too much," Bridget would sneer, snatching food from my plate. "At your age, you should be grateful for scraps." They isolated me from friends. When my neighbor Mrs. Henderson called, Bridget would answer sweetly, "Oh, Patricia's not feeling well today. She's sleeping." I'd hear her through the thin walls, lying effortlessly while I sat alone in my room, forbidden from answering the phone. The financial abuse was subtle but devastating. Declan convinced me to sign papers, claiming they were for household management. I trusted him because he was my son. Only later did I realize he'd been draining my accounts, using my pension to fund their lifestyle while I wore the same threadbare clothes for months. Winter nights were the worst. They'd turn off the heating in my room, saying it was too expensive. I'd shiver under thin blankets, listening to them laugh and watch television in the warm living room. When I'd venture out for a glass of water, Bridget would glare at me like I was an intruder. "Why don't she just die already?" she whispered one night when Declan was at the pub. "You're sucking the life out of everyone around you, even your precious." Arthur couldn't wait to escape. I stood there in my nightgown, trembling, wondering how my life had become this nightmare. The physical abuse started with accidents. Declan would bump into me hard enough to leave bruises, then apologize with mock concern. "Sorry, Mum. Didn't see you there. Maybe you should stay in your room more." Bridget would accidentally slam doors on my fingers or knock me with her elbow while passing. But that Tuesday morning in March changed everything. I'd asked Declan to help bring in groceries just to bags from the car. My arthritis was flaring, and the bags felt impossibly heavy. "Can't you see I'm busy?" he snapped, not looking up from his phone. "You managed fine before we moved in. I just need help with." "Shut up," he exploded, jumping from his chair. "I'm sick of your constant whining." "You want help? Here's your help." He grabbed the kettle from the stove, the same kettle Arthur had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The water was still boiling from his morning tea. Before I could move, before I could even scream, he poured it down my left arm. The pain was indescribable. My skin bubbled and peeled instantly. I collapsed, clutching my arm, sobbing. Through my tears, I saw Bridget standing in the doorway, not rushing to help, not calling for an ambulance. She was smiling. "Maybe now you'll learn to keep your mouth shut," she said calmly, stepping over me to make herself breakfast. I lay on that kitchen floor for 20 minutes before dragging myself to the bathroom. In the mirror, I saw a broken woman I barely recognized. My arm was raw and blistered, But something else had changed. In my eyes, I saw a spark I thought had died with Arthur. That night, as I sat in my room applying aloe to my burns, I remembered something Arthur used to say. Patricia, you're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you forget that. For the first time in 3 years, I felt that strength stirring. I pulled out the old showbox from under my bed, the one containing all our important papers. As I sorted through documents, my hands shaking, I found something that made my heart race. The property deeds. Both the house and the cottage were in my name only. Arthur had insisted on it years ago for tax reasons. Declan and Bridget had no legal right to be here. They were living in my house, spending my money, abusing me in my own home. The realization hit me like lightning. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. I was the owner, and it was time to reclaim what was mine. The next morning, I called my old friend Isabel from the cottage phone, the one line Declan and Bridget didn't monitor. Isabel had been Arthur's colleague at the law firm, specializing in elder rights. Her voice was warm but shocked when I described my situation. Patricia, what you're describing is criminal elder abuse, she said firmly. We need to document everything and get you out of there immediately. Within hours, she arrived with a photographer and a social worker. They documented my burns, took pictures of my cramped living conditions, and recorded my testimony. Isabel's eyes blazed with righteous anger as she examined the property deeds. You own both properties outright. They have no legal standing here whatsoever. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police and starting eviction proceedings. Today, the confrontation came faster than I expected. That evening, as Declan and Bridget sat in what they considered their living room, Isabel knocked on the door with 2 police officers and an eviction notice. What's this about? Declan demanded, his face flushing red when he saw me standing behind Isabel. Mr. O'Sullivan, you and your wife are being evicted from this property for elder abuse and unlawful occupation, Officer Martinez announced. You have 72 hours to vacate. Bridget's composure cracked completely. You can't do this. We live here. We take care of the old bat. She pointed at me with shaking fingers. She's senile. She doesn't know what she's saying. Ma'am, we have documented evidence of abuse, including photographs of burns inflicted by your husband, Officer Martinez replied calmly. Mrs. O'Sullivan is the sole property owner and has every right to remove you. Declan's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful witch! After everything we've done for you. He lunged toward me, but Officer Martinez stepped between us. Sir, I suggest you start packing. Any further threats will result in immediate arrest. Those 72 hours were the longest of my life. Declan and Bridget raged through the house like caged animals, breaking Arthur's favorite mug, tearing down family photos, screaming threats through my bedroom door. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Isabel had arranged for me to stay at the cottage, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. On eviction day, I watched from the cottage window as they loaded their belongings into a rented truck. Declan stood in the driveway, staring at the house with pure hatred. This isn't over, Mom, he shouted toward my window. You'll regret this. But I felt no regret, only relief. The house stood empty and quiet, waiting for its next chapter. That's when the idea came to me. Sitting in Arthur's favorite chair at the cottage, looking across at our old home, I remembered all the nights I'd lain awake listening to other women's stories on late-night radio. Women whose children had stolen their homes, their dignity, their hope. Women like me, with nowhere to turn. I called Isabel the next morning. I want to donate the house to a women's shelter organization, specifically for older women who've been abused or displaced by their own families. Isabel was quiet for a moment. Patricia, are you sure? That's a significant financial decision. I've never been more sure of anything. That house was built with love, but it became a place of pain. I want to transform it into something beautiful again. Within weeks, Isabel connected me with Second Chances, a nonprofit organization that provided transitional housing for displaced women. The director, Maria Santos, was a fierce advocate who understood exactly what I wanted to create. We'll call it The Haven, I told her as we walked through the empty rooms, a place where women can rebuild their lives without fear. The transformation took 3 months. Volunteers painted every room in warm, welcoming colors. The kitchen where Declan had burned me became a communal space filled with laughter and shared meals. My old bedroom became a counseling room where women could speak freely about their experiences. I carved a wooden sign for the front garden myself, my arthritic hands working slowly but deliberately. The haven built by a woman who was told to die elsewhere. I hung it next to Arthur's rose bushes, which had miraculously begun blooming again under Maria's care. The first resident was Mabel, a 74-year-old woman whose gambling-addicted son had sold her house without her knowledge to pay his debts. She arrived with nothing but a small suitcase and eyes full of the same broken despair I'd once carried. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered as I showed her to her room, the same room where I'd once been imprisoned. "You don't need to thank me," I replied, squeezing her weathered hand. "You just need to heal." Watching Mabel slowly regain her confidence over the following weeks was like watching a flower bloom. She started cooking again, sharing stories of her late husband, laughing at silly television shows. Other women arrived: Sarah, whose daughter had been stealing her social security checks; Emma, whose son's wife had made her life so miserable she'd considered ending it all. Each woman brought her own story of betrayal and pain, but also her own strength and wisdom. The haven became more than a shelter. It became a community of survivors who understood each other's journey. 6 months after the eviction, I received a letter from Declan. No apology, just demands for money and threats of legal action. I showed it to Isabel, who laughed and filed it away. "He has no legal standing, Patricia. You owe him nothing." She was right. I owed him nothing, but I owed myself everything. I owed myself the peace I'd found in my cottage garden, the joy I felt watching women reclaim their lives at the haven, the satisfaction of turning my greatest pain into my greatest purpose. Today, the haven houses 12 women at any given time, with a waiting list of others seeking refuge. I visit daily, sharing meals and stories, offering the kind of support I'd desperately needed during my darkest hours. Sometimes I stand in that kitchen where my nightmare began, watching women prepare dinner together, their laughter echoing off the walls. The kettle sits on the same stove, but now it serves tea to friends instead of weapons to enemies. Arthur would be proud. His roses bloom brighter than ever, and his house has become exactly what he always dreamed of: a place filled with love, hope, and second chances. If you're listening to this and recognizing your own story, please know that you're not alone. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve better than abuse disguised as care. Drop your location below so others can find support. Hit subscribe to share this message, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your life. Moral lesson: sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply refusing to remain a victim, choosing instead to transform your pain into purpose, and discovering that the strength you thought was lost was merely waiting for the right moment to bloom again.